My child, stop for a moment, because what I am about to tell you is connected to something you cried about 3 years ago, and if you ignore this moment, you may miss the very answer you once begged me to give you when your heart was breaking in silence. I am speaking to you now with a tenderness that carries the weight of everything you survived, because this is not an ordinary word placed before you by accident. This moment was arranged long before you arrived here, before your eyes reached these words, before your thoughts slowed enough to listen. I had already decided that today would be the day I would begin uncovering what you were never able to understand when the pain first touched your life. You thought that season had ended and disappeared into memory, but I tell you now, it never left my hands. Not one part of it drifted away from my sight. Not one cry escaped my hearing. Not one night passed without me standing near you while you wondered why I remained silent. I know exactly which night you are remembering even now, the night when you looked around and felt something inside you collapse, because what you trusted no longer felt safe, what you expected no longer remained, and what you prayed for did not arrive. You did not have words for the weight you carried, but I understood every unspoken thought. I understood the trembling behind your silence, the heaviness in your chest, the way you tried to act normal while privately asking if I still saw you. This message is not for everyone. This is about you and me and no one else. Let every distraction fall away because heaven is speaking in a way that is deeply personal now. I am not addressing crowds in this moment. I am leaning toward the hidden part of your heart that still carries unanswered questions from that season. There are things I have waited to explain because your heart was not ready to hear them when they first happened. There are truths that can only be received after the wound stops bleeding enough for wisdom to enter. 3 years ago you thought something was ending, and from where you stood, it looked final. It looked like loss. It looked like confusion. It looked like abandonment. But what you called the end was a beginning you were not ready to understand yet. What you called silence was construction hidden behind doors you could not open. What you called distance was my hand protecting something you did not know needed protection. I know you asked why certain people changed. I know you asked why doors that once seemed certain suddenly became cold. I know you asked why prayer met quiet instead of immediate rescue. I know because every question reached me even when your lips never formed the words. Do not leave this moment too quickly, because if you walk away before hearing what I am uncovering, you will leave before understanding why that pain did not destroy you when by human strength it should have broken far more than it did. There is a reason you survived what tried to empty you. There is a reason your heart still beats with hope even after nights when you thought hope had no place left in you. There is a reason I allowed certain things to fall apart without stopping them immediately, and before this message is complete, you will understand why the delay remained, why some voices disappeared, why certain hands released yours, and why my silence lasted longer than you thought love should allow. Stay close now, because this is not merely comfort. This is revelation. I remember the exact tears you thought nobody noticed. I remember the hour you looked upward but could not pray because disappointment had stolen language from your mouth. I remember the moment betrayal became real to you, not because someone confessed it, but because you felt the shift in how they spoke, how they withdrew, how they stopped carrying the same sincerity they once showed you. I remember the exact night you replayed conversations in your mind trying to understand where everything changed. I remember the unanswered prayer you whispered with your face turned away so nobody would see your tears. I remember the loneliness that arrived not because you lacked people around you, but because the one understanding you needed did not come from where you expected it. You thought those moments were disappearing into the past, but they were never forgotten in heaven. Every tear remained counted. Every trembling breath remained known. Every silent ache remained held. You wondered why I did not interrupt faster. You wondered why I allowed time to stretch while you waited for something clear. You wondered whether my silence meant distance, whether my quietness meant I had stepped back. But listen carefully now. Silence does not mean absence when I am writing something deeper than immediate relief. There are seasons when I speak by holding instead of explaining, by guarding instead of revealing, by building beneath the surface while your eyes search for visible movement. I was not inactive in that season. I was arranging pieces you could not yet identify. I was preserving parts of you that would have been damaged if I had answered too early. I was moving unseen because visible answers would have interrupted deeper healing that had not yet finished within you. There were things around you that needed to leave because what I planned next could not grow inside the same emotional structure that held your past. Some people left not because you had no value, but because their assignment in your life had already reached its limit even while your heart still wanted them to remain. Some doors closed not because I forgot your prayer, but because what waited beyond them would have tied you to a version of yourself I was already asking you to outgrow. I know you fought to understand this. I know you tried to blame yourself for every departure. I know you asked if you had done something wrong, if you had failed, if you had somehow caused what broke. But not every ending was punishment. Some endings were mercy disguised in grief. Tom, and I know God is fighting for me right now if the battle feels too heavy to carry. What hurt most was not only what happened, but how little sense it made while it happened. You looked for meaning and found only fragments. You searched for explanation and met delay. You expected clarity and met another silent day. Yet even then, I held every piece. I never dropped your story when your own thoughts became too tired to hold it together. Even when you stopped trying to explain your pain to others because repeating it became exhausting, I remained near, holding details nobody else could read. I saw how you smiled in moments when your spirit was heavy. I saw how you carried ordinary responsibilities while inwardly asking how long the ache would continue. I saw how you kept moving while secretly wondering if you had already lost something essential inside yourself. This is why I am asking you again. Stay until the end of what I am saying, because the part you nearly gave up on understanding is now ready to open before you. There is meaning in the delay. There is purpose in what seemed broken. There is hidden order in what looked scattered. What felt random was never random to me. What felt abandoned was never abandoned in my hands. There were nights when you believed nothing was happening, yet those were the nights I was doing work so delicate that if I had shown you all of it then, you would not have recognized its value. This is about you and me, and no one else. Let that settle deeply now. This is not about proving anything to people who misunderstood your silence. This is not about returning to those who did not understand your pain. This is not about explaining yourself to those who left before the full story unfolded. This is about me showing you that while you feared everything was slipping, I was holding what mattered most with precision you could not yet see. I never confused your tears. I never dismissed your waiting. I never ignored your private collapse. I knew exactly how much pressure your spirit could bear, and I knew exactly when to hold back answers because immediate explanation would not have healed what deeper time needed to restore. Before this message ends, you will understand why delay happened. You will understand why some people left when they did. You will understand why silence lasted longer than you thought it should. You will understand why pain touched you deeply but did not finish you. And when you understand, you will also see that the chapter you called lost was never abandoned. It remained inside my hands the entire time, and even now, what once confused you is beginning to speak with meaning you could never hear until this moment. My child, come closer in your heart for this moment, because what I am saying now was never meant to be heard like ordinary words passing through a crowd. Many people hear words every day and continue walking with the same noise in their minds. But this moment is different because I am not speaking into a crowd now. I am speaking into the hidden chamber of your spirit where only you and I truly know what has been carried there. There are moments when heaven speaks publicly, and there are moments when heaven lowers its voice and speaks so personally that even while others may hear the same sound, only one heart recognizes that the message was written with their tears in mind. This is one of those moments. This was never public. This was always personal. Long before your eyes reached this message, long before your thoughts became still enough to remain here, I had already chosen this exact moment because I knew there were things inside you that had reached a place where explanation could finally enter. I know how often you have heard words that sounded beautiful but did not reach the wound you were hiding. I know how often you listened while secretly wondering whether any message could truly know the part of you that has remained unspoken for so long. But I tell you now with tenderness and certainty, I know the exact part of you that trembles even when your face remains calm, and I know why this conversation had to happen now. Please support our channel. Our work is to bring happiness in your life and devotion to God. And if you want, you can donate to us via given link in description or pinned comment to show your support. Many hear words, but this message is specifically yours because I am not addressing your surface. I am speaking to the part of you that remembers things you never fully explained to anyone. I am speaking to the part of you that learned how to remain composed while inwardly carrying questions that no conversation ever fully answered. I know how often you have stood among others while feeling separated inside, because although voices surrounded you, understanding did not always reach you. I know how often you answered simply when deeper truths remained locked behind silence. That silence never confused me. Even when others only heard what you allowed them to hear, I listened beneath your words. Even when others assumed they understood your strength, I knew where that strength was fragile. Even when people formed conclusions before hearing your heart, I had already understood what you could not yet explain. Before anyone misunderstood you, I understood you. Before anyone labeled your quietness incorrectly, I knew what your silence was protecting. Before anyone thought your distance meant indifference, I knew how much energy it took for you simply to keep your heart steady. Heaven has private conversations, and this is one of them. There are moments when I speak in ways that pass beyond ordinary encouragement because certain truths are not meant to remain general when they are tied to very specific tears. I do not gather your life into broad ideas. I know details. I know exact evenings, exact disappointments, exact inner reactions you never gave language to. There were moments when you smiled because speaking truth felt too exhausting, and I watched that smile while also seeing the ache beneath it. There were moments when you nodded in front of others while inwardly feeling something entirely different, and I watched both your outward calm and inward struggle together. There were moments when even prayer became difficult because what you felt was too deep to organize, yet your silence still reached me more clearly than spoken sentences. Do you understand how closely I have watched you? Not with distance, not with judgment, but with the nearness of one who never lost sight of what others overlooked. I watched your silent reactions more than your spoken prayers. I watched the pause after conversations ended when certain words stayed with you longer than people knew. I watched the way your eyes lowered when disappointment returned again in a form you hoped would not repeat itself. I watched the breath you released when no answer came where you had hoped for clarity. I watched how you held yourself together after hearing something painful because you had already learned that not every place was safe enough for full honesty. I watched the way you became quiet, not because nothing was happening inside you, but because too much was happening to explain easily. Even before you formed prayer, your reactions were already speaking to me. The slight heaviness in your spirit when trust felt uncertain, the way certain memories returned when you were alone, the way old questions rose again when nights became still. I watched all of it with patience and understanding. My child, this is why I am separating you emotionally from every crowd right now. For a few moments, release the idea that you are listening as one among many. Listen as one being addressed personally by the one who has known you before every misunderstanding, before every disappointment, before every explanation you tried to create for yourself. This is about you and me. Let those words settle without hurry. This is about you and me. Not about proving anything to people who never saw the whole picture. Not about defending your heart before those who form quick judgments. Not about revisiting every voice that spoke without full understanding. This is about you and me, because there are truths only intimacy with me can reveal, truths that no crowd can explain for you. You have often wondered whether being deeply known would ever feel safe. Part of you longed for someone to recognize what you never said. Yet another part learned caution because being misunderstood repeatedly taught you how to protect yourself quietly. But I have never approached your heart carelessly. I do not rush where tenderness is required. I do not force explanation where healing must first create room. I have waited because I know timing matters when truth enters fragile places. And now I speak gently because I know there are still places in you that react to old memories more deeply than you admit. Even now there are certain names, certain seasons, certain unfinished questions that still touch places inside you thought had already become distant. I know this, and I do not speak without knowing exactly where my words are landing. Before anyone ever interpreted your choices, I already knew what you were trying to survive. Before anyone decided your silence meant weakness or pride or withdrawal, I knew how much thought you carried before speaking. Before anyone assumed your strength meant you needed little care, I saw how deeply you still needed reassurance in ways you rarely asked for. I know how carefully you have carried yourself because you did not always trust that your deeper thoughts would be received with gentleness. Yet I never mistook your guarded places for distance from me. I knew those guarded places often came from wounds still learning how to rest. Heaven remembers what earth quickly moves past. I remember the look in your spirit when certain things changed around you and you said nothing because words would not have changed what you already felt. I remember when you first sensed that some relationships no longer held the same warmth they once did, even before anyone admitted it openly. I remember how you noticed shifts before others acknowledged them. I remember how your heart reacted quietly before your mouth ever spoke. I remember the nights when you replayed moments trying to understand whether you were imagining what you felt or whether something had truly changed. And even when you questioned yourself, I already knew what your spirit was sensing. This conversation is private because there are things I want you to hear without outside noise entering. You have spent enough time listening to interpretations that did not fully understand your story. For this moment, hear only my understanding. Hear me say clearly, I never confuse your silence for lack of faith. I never interpreted your tiredness as failure. I never saw your questions as rejection. I understood that sometimes your faith survived quietly, without dramatic language, simply by remaining present one more day when your heart felt heavy. That quiet endurance did not escape me. Even when you thought your faith looked small, I saw its depth because I saw how much it cost you to remain steady. This is about you and me, and because it is, I want you to hear what few truly understand. Being chosen does not always feel loud at first. Sometimes being chosen feels like being quietly held while the world continues around you. Sometimes being chosen feels like being seen in hidden reactions nobody applauds. Sometimes being chosen feels like being understood before you explain yourself. I chose to know you fully, not partially. I chose to remain when you did not fully understand your own emotions. I chose to stay close even in seasons when your own thoughts exhausted you. You are individually known beyond what human language usually reaches. I know the prayers you spoke, but I also know the moments when prayer stayed inside tears instead of words. I know the strength people noticed, but I also know the weariness they missed. I know the parts of your personality others recognize, but I also know the softer parts you reveal only rarely because experience taught you caution. Nothing about you is general to me. Nothing about your story blends into a crowd from heaven's perspective. Your history is known detail by detail. Your reactions are known moment by moment. Your heart is known deeply, not from distance but from closeness that never left. Type God's plan is always greater if you've released your own plans into His hands. So listen carefully now, because this secret conversation begins here. You were never overlooked. You were never partially seen. You were never waiting alone while heaven remained uncertain. Every quiet reaction, every hidden ache, every restrained tear, every moment you wondered whether anyone truly understood, all of it remained fully visible before me. And now, because this is about you and me, I will continue speaking until the things you carried privately begin to receive the light they have waited for. 3 years ago, something changed in your life in a way that your heart still remembers even if your mouth no longer speaks of it often. I want you to return there with me now. Not because I desire to reopen pain without purpose, but because what began in that season cannot be understood unless you allow yourself to see it again through my eyes instead of only through your wounds. That season did not begin like a storm with warning signs that everyone could recognize. For you, it may have arrived quietly at first, almost unnoticed, like a small shift in atmosphere, a subtle discomfort, a conversation that felt different, a silence that lingered too long, a prayer that suddenly met no visible answer, a door that no longer opened the way it once did. At first you thought perhaps it was temporary. You thought perhaps tomorrow would explain what today could not. But then the day stretched, and what you hoped would pass began settling into reality. The heartbreak deepened. A betrayal revealed itself slowly or all at once. Finances tightened in ways that created fear you did not want to admit. Loneliness entered even while people still existed around you. Spiritual confusion grew because the voice you expected to hear from me seemed hidden behind a silence you could not interpret. Some experienced sudden separation, where someone you expected to remain became distant, absent, chained, or entirely gone. Others faced unanswered prayer so persistent that even faith began to feel heavy in your own hands. Heaven marked that exact season even when you did not understand what was being marked. I knew the precise month, the exact night, the exact conversation, the exact message, the exact silence, the exact moment your heart shifted because something inside you realized life no longer felt the same. You may remember that time by a person, by a loss, by an event, by a collapse, by a disappointment, by an absence, or by a prayer that remained suspended in uncertainty. But I remember it in complete detail. Nothing about that season entered my sight as confusion. What overwhelmed you did not overwhelm my understanding. I saw the beginning while you only felt the impact. You thought I was absent. That is one of the deepest truths of that season, and I speak it gently because I know how painful that thought became. You did not always say it aloud, because part of you still wanted to believe I was near. But there were moments when your heart whispered questions that sounded like distance. You wondered why my voice seemed quieter when you needed direction most. You wondered why events unfolded without immediate intervention. You wondered why what you had protected still cracked, why what you trusted still changed, why what you prayed over still remained uncertain. You thought my silence meant I had stepped back, that perhaps I was allowing you to stand in something alone. But I tell you now, I was not absent for one breath of that season. I was there when the first signs appeared. I was there when your chest tightened because something subtly felt wrong. I was there when your mind began replaying details trying to understand what was happening. I was there when you looked outward calmly while inwardly asking if everything was beginning to fall apart. I remember your nights. I remember the nights more clearly than you know. The nights when sleep became difficult because thoughts would not rest. The nights when you lay still but your mind kept moving through conversations, through fears, through possibilities, through questions you could not silence. I remember when darkness in the room made emotions louder because there were no distractions left to soften them. Some nights you cried quietly because you did not want anyone else to hear. Some nights tears came suddenly without warning because exhaustion loosened what daytime had forced you to hold. Some nights you stared without speaking because your thoughts had become too heavy for words. Some nights prayer began but broke apart halfway because disappointment interrupted language. And even on nights when no tears came, I saw the ache behind your stillness. I remember confusion that had no immediate explanation. Confusion is often harder than visible pain because pain can at least be named. But confusion leaves the heart wandering through unfinished meanings. You asked yourself whether you had misunderstood people, misunderstood timing, misunderstood what you believed I had shown you. You wondered if you had trusted wrongly, spoken wrongly, waited wrongly, hoped wrongly. You looked at events and tried to fit them together, but pieces did not align quickly enough to calm your spirit. Why now? You asked inside yourself. Why this when I'd already carried enough? Why this door? Why this silence? Why this change? Why this loss? Why this withdrawal? Why this uncertainty? Those questions were not rebellion to me. They were the language of a wounded heart trying to survive confusion without losing trust entirely. Some of you remember heartbreak from that season as the moment love no longer felt safe. Not always because love disappeared completely, but because trust was shaken by what changed. It may have been someone leaving, someone changing, someone becoming cold, someone failing to remain what they once promised. You carried the private shock of realizing that what once comforted now created ache. And because heartbreak does not always happen loudly, you sometimes endured it while still functioning normally before others. I saw every private reaction. I saw the way your heart tightened when reminders appeared unexpectedly. I saw the way certain names, certain places, certain songs, certain memories carried more weight than they knew. Some experienced betrayal that season, and betrayal has a unique wound because it does not only hurt what happened, it hurts because trust once existed where pain later arrived. I know how deeply betrayal confuses the spirit because it forces you to revisit moments you once considered safe. You began asking whether signs were present earlier, whether words had hidden something you failed to notice. You replayed details because betrayal makes memory search for warning signs. And still I watched you, not condemning your confusion, not dismissing your sorrow, but holding your thoughts while you struggled to understand what had changed. Some faced financial collapse or fear tied to provision, where numbers became heavier than paper because they touched your sense of security. There were days you calculated possibilities and still felt uncertainty. You wondered how long stability would remain. You wondered whether needs would be met. You looked ahead and saw questions larger than answers. And though others may not have known how deeply it affected you, I saw how practical fear entered emotional spaces too. Some endured loneliness that was difficult to explain because loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of being fully understood. You sat among conversations and still felt alone because the deeper thing inside you remained untouched. You wished someone would ask the right question. Notice the hidden heaviness. Stay long enough to hear what you could not easily begin saying. Yet often you chose silence, because starting felt harder than enduring quietly. There was also spiritual confusion. This may have been one of the hardest parts because when life becomes painful, many expect my voice to become immediately clear. Yet there are seasons when my silence feels sharper precisely because your need feels urgent. You prayed and expected a clear answer, but sometimes only quiet returned. You searched for confirmation and met waiting instead. You opened your heart hoping for immediate understanding, yet days passed with little visible explanation. And again the questions returned. Why now? Why this? Why does heaven feel quiet while my heart is loud? Yet heaven marked that exact season not as abandonment, but as the hidden beginning of something larger than you could read then. What you called interruption, heaven recorded as transition. What you called collapse, heaven marked as a line where old structures could no longer carry what would come next. What you called silence, heaven marked as preparation. Even your tears were not random in that season. They watered places in you that had never been reached before. You thought that season was only pain, but it was also the hidden beginning of everything that would later reshape how you see yourself, how you trust, how you pray, how you listen, how you discern who belongs near your heart and who does not. You did not know that then. You only knew the ache, the waiting, the questions, the quiet. But I knew that exact season by name before it ever arrived, and I remained there with you through every night, every tear, every unanswered why, every trembling breath that carried more emotion than words ever could. My child, I know that one of the deepest wounds from that season was not only what happened around you, but what did not happen when you begged for something to change. You expected a clear answer, a visible movement, a door opening, a voice interrupting the heaviness, some sign that would immediately tell you I had heard everything you were carrying. Instead, what reached you first was silence, and that silence became difficult because silence can feel heavier than pain when the heart is desperate for direction. You waited for words and received stillness. You waited for immediate relief and instead watched another day arrive carrying the same unanswered weight. You asked me questions in moments when no answer seemed to come quickly enough to calm your spirit. In those hours, you wondered whether my silence meant distance, whether my quietness meant hesitation, whether perhaps I had chosen not to respond yet because something in you was not enough. But hear me clearly now. Silence was never rejection. Silence was construction. What felt like silence was me building. I did not withdraw because I lacked love. I became quiet because there were things being formed beneath the surface that noise would have interrupted. If I had filled every moment with explanation, you would have focused on immediate relief and missed the deeper work being laid quietly, where your future needed strength. There are times when my love speaks loudly, and there are times when my love protects by remaining hidden while foundations are strengthened in ways you cannot yet measure. What felt like silence was me building hidden walls around places in your life you did not yet know needed protection. What felt like silence was me standing inside unfinished spaces, placing structure where weakness had once remained unnoticed. You saw absence because you were looking for visible change, but beneath what your eyes could read, I was already arranging what would later keep you from collapsing under things not yet arrived. You must understand that silence often feels painful because human hearts naturally connect love with immediate response. When you cry, you expect an answer. When you ask, you expect movement. When you hurt, you hope comfort arrives in a way you can immediately recognize. Yet divine love is not always immediate explanation, because immediate explanation can sometimes interrupt what deeper wisdom must build first. I knew how much you wanted answers then. I knew how urgently you wanted clarity. I knew how often your spirit searched for one sign that would make everything understandable. But some answers could not arrive before character matured, because if they had arrived too early, you would have entered them carrying weaknesses that later pain would expose more sharply. There were hidden walls being built inside you. Walls not of distance, but of discernment. Walls not to close your heart forever, but to teach your heart what must no longer enter without wisdom. Before that season, there were things you trusted too quickly, burdens you carried too personally, voices you allowed too near your peace, expectations you held without yet knowing how deeply they could wound when they shifted. Silence became the place where I began teaching you how to stand differently, how to listen more carefully, how to stop measuring everything by immediate emotional response. You thought I was doing nothing because the walls were invisible while they were rising. But invisible does not mean inactive. Foundations are often quiet while being laid because strong architecture is built beneath before beauty becomes visible above. There was also hidden protection in my silence. Some things did not move because I was preventing movements you would have later regretted. Some conversations did not unfold because your heart would have spoken from wounds not yet steady enough to carry truth without deeper damage. Some relationships remained uncertain because immediate clarity would have tied you to choices your future could not sustain. Some doors stayed delayed because what waited beyond them required a version of you still being formed quietly. You saw delay and wondered if I had forgotten timing, but hidden delay is often hidden mercy. Delay becomes painful only when you believe nothing sacred can happen inside waiting. Yet waiting is where many sacred protections remain invisible until years later. Right, you are my hiding place, God, if He's your refuge and safe shelter. And share this video, my child. Listen carefully. Heaven is speaking because what you survived was never small. You did it. Before your thoughts move too quickly and tell you this is ordinary, before your tired heart tries to reduce your journey into something simple, I need you to hear me clearly. What you passed through was heavier than many people ever understood. And the fact that you are still here is not a small detail in your story. You are not listening to these words by accident. I have placed this moment in front of you because there are truths about your survival that you have not fully understood yet. There are parts of your journey you still judge too harshly because you only saw the pain, the delay, the struggle, and the repeated closed doors. But I saw everything from above and from within. I saw every hidden fight you never explained to anyone because you no longer had strength to explain it. I saw the days when you smiled while carrying pressure no one could read. I saw the nights when your thoughts became heavier than your words, when you questioned whether you had reached the edge of what your spirit could carry. And still you moved one more day, then one more day again, even when you did not call that movement courage. Heaven calls it strength even when you called it survival. This message is appearing now because I want you to understand that your survival was never ordinary. It was not simply another season passing. It was not random endurance. It was not human stubbornness alone. There were moments when the weight against you was greater than what people around you knew. There were moments when even those nearest to you saw only the surface, while deeper battles pressed against your mind, your peace, your hope, and your ability to believe that tomorrow would still carry purpose. Yet you remained. And I tell you now, many things that looked normal around your struggle were not normal at all. Many obstacles that appeared simple were carrying deeper resistance than you realized. Many delays that seemed small on the outside were touching places inside you that made the journey heavier than anyone could measure by sight alone. You thought you failed many times, but I saw every system built to slow you. I saw how often you blamed yourself for outcomes that were shaped by forces larger than your own mistakes. I saw how quickly you turned disappointment inward and called yourself weak when in truth you were standing inside situations already made difficult before you even entered them. There were rooms where hearts had already formed opinions before your effort arrived. There were places where fairness did not greet you equally. There were moments when you gave more than others yet received less, and because you could not explain why the result looked so uneven, you assumed perhaps you had simply failed again. But my child, not every closed result was proof that you lacked enough. Some paths were difficult because resistance stood there before your first step. What blocked others less than it blocked you was never accidental. I need you to understand this deeply because too many times you looked sideways and wondered why what seemed easy for another became exhausting for you. You saw others move through doors that remained shut before your hand touched them. You watched people receive responses while your own efforts met silence. You wondered why the same kind of work, the same kind of sincerity, the same kind of waiting produced different outcomes. You questioned whether something in you was missing. But there were moments when the weight on your road was not equal, and heaven knows this. I saw where extra resistance stood. I saw how some roads tightened only when your feet approached them. I saw where unseen barriers gathered around what belonged to your future because not every delay was natural and not every obstacle was ordinary. I watched every rigged door close in front of you. Every time you prepared yourself inwardly and believed perhaps this moment would finally open, I was there when the answer shifted, when the opportunity moved away, when the silence returned. I watched how your spirit tried to stay calm while disappointment quietly entered again. I saw how many times you did not even tell others how much hope you had carried into a certain moment because you were tired of sounding hopeful when results kept arriving late. I saw the messages you waited for that never came, the names you expected to remember you but they did not, the openings that looked close enough to touch but then changed before you reached them. I watched every one of those moments, and none of them were invisible to me. There were paths you never knew were changed against you before you arrived. There were decisions made far from your hearing that affected your timing. There were minds already influenced before your effort was even considered. There were unseen conversations, hidden preferences, silent exclusions, and quiet shifts that you never knew had already happened. You entered some situations believing your effort alone would be enough, not knowing that unseen things had already tilted the path before your step arrived. This is why some disappointments felt confusing to you, because you judged only what you could see, while I saw what was arranged before you came near. Yet even there, my hand remained active, because what others quietly altered could not fully destroy what I had spoken over you. Say I'm walking fully in my purpose if you're aligned with His perfect will. Still, you are here, which means what was built to stop you could not finish its assignment. Hear that carefully, because your continued presence is already evidence that many things failed against you. The pressure was real, but it did not finish you. The disappointment was sharp, but it did not erase you. The closed seasons were painful, but they did not cancel you. What was meant to drain your faith completely did not succeed. What was meant to make you stop believing entirely did not complete its purpose. You are still breathing, still listening, still able to hear my voice, which means the assignment against your peace, against your future, against your rising, reached limits it could not cross because I remained between you and complete collapse. Stay with me because the final words explain why you are still standing when many expected collapse. Do not move away too quickly from what I am saying, because there are truths your spirit has waited to hear, and if you leave too early you may miss the very part that explains why certain things had to unfold exactly as they did. I know some parts of your heart still carry confusion because survival alone does not always answer why suffering lasted so long. But remain here, because understanding is forming while you listen. There are reasons why your story did not break where others predicted it would. There are reasons why even after repeated pressure something inside you refused to disappear completely. Your win was not luck. I engineered what human hands could not understand. The moments you call fortunate were often carefully placed by me after long unseen preparation. The right delay, the right interruption, the right protection, the right redirection, the right person arriving later instead of sooner. These were not random pieces falling kindly into place. I arranged more than you knew. I slowed what needed slowing. I blocked what looked attractive but carried hidden damage. I opened small things you almost overlooked because those small openings kept larger dangers from reaching you too early. Even your survival through ordinary days carried my design more than you understood. There were moments when one conversation changed a direction you did not know was dangerous. There were moments when one closed answer saved you from entering a season that would have cost you deeply. There were moments when what you call disappointment was actually protection standing in front of loss. Human hands cannot always understand this because people often measure blessing only by what opens quickly. But I measure blessing also by what I keep away until the hour can hold it safely. And now hear this before this moment passes. What I broke behind your back is the reason your enemies cannot explain your survival. They do not understand why certain plans around you weakened. They do not understand why outcomes they expected did not fully happen. They do not understand why after pressure, silence, and repeated struggle you still remain standing. But behind your back I broke things you never saw breaking. I weakened words spoken against your peace. I interrupted patterns that were forming against your progress. I dismantled unseen agreements that would have tightened further around your path. What they cannot explain is not your strength alone. It is my hand where their eyes never looked. It is my interruption where they thought no interruption would come. It is my faithfulness working where visible proof was absent. And what they still do not understand is that the same hand that kept you standing is not finished speaking over what comes next. My child, the reason you thought you failed so many times is because you were measuring your journey by what you could immediately see, while I was measuring it by what was still standing after every storm passed through you. Human eyes often call a season failure when results do not arrive quickly, when effort does not immediately produce visible reward, when doors remain closed after repeated knocking, and when the heart becomes tired from waiting longer than expected. That is how your own thoughts often judge your path. You looked at the repeated struggle, at the same battles returning in different forms, at the goals that seemed near and then moved again, and you quietly began to wonder if perhaps the struggle itself was proof that you had fallen behind. There were moments when you believed that if you had truly done enough, if you had truly been strong enough, if you had truly understood everything correctly, then surely things would have moved differently by now. But listen carefully, because what you called failure was often simply the weight of resistance pressing against a life that carried purpose greater than you understood. Please support our channel. Our work is to bring happiness in your life and devotion to God. And if you want, you can donate to us via given link in description or pinned comment to show your support. Repeated struggle feels like failure when you are inside it because pain repeats louder than progress. Every time you rose again only to meet another obstacle, your heart interpreted that repetition as proof that something must be wrong. You thought perhaps you were missing something others understood more easily. You wondered why one challenge finished and another quickly appeared. You asked yourself why peace stayed so brief before another burden arrived. But repeated struggle does not always mean you are losing ground. Sometimes repeated struggle means you are moving through layers of pressure that others cannot see. A person standing outside your journey may only notice one visible obstacle, but I saw the deeper weight attached to each season you crossed. I saw the private fears you fought while still trying to appear steady. I saw the moments when even simple tasks felt heavy because inwardly your mind was carrying questions you could not answer. What looked ordinary from outside often cost you far more strength than anyone knew. There were days when you completed what seemed small, yet heaven counted it as victory because I knew how much unseen weight was pressing against you while you kept moving. There were mornings when simply getting up and facing another day required more courage than anyone around you understood. There were conversations you finished while carrying pain you never mentioned. There were responsibilities you fulfilled while inwardly wondering how long your strength would hold. But because human measurement often celebrates only visible outcomes, you did not always call these moments victory. You compared your unfinished goals to what others displayed publicly and concluded too quickly that you must be failing. Yet I tell you now, many things you survived would have stopped someone who had not carried the strength I placed inside you. Human measurement created false defeat in your mind because human measurement usually looks only at speed, applause, visible gain, and outward proof. The world often teaches that if something takes longer, it means something is wrong. It teaches that if others move ahead visibly while you remain in process, then perhaps you have fallen behind. It teaches that quick arrival equals success and slow seasons equal weakness. But heaven does not measure like that. I do not call a person defeated because a result delayed. I do not name someone lost because progress happened quietly instead of publicly. I see deeper than timing alone. I see what pressure tried to destroy and failed to destroy. I see what sorrow tried to silence and could not silence. I see what disappointment tried to remove from your spirit and could not fully remove. This is why your own conclusion about yourself was often harsher than truth. You counted what had not happened yet, but you did not count how many times you still remained when many expected you to withdraw completely. You noticed every closed answer, but you did not notice how many dangers you crossed without understanding what had been held back. You remembered each delay, but you forgot how many times your heart was preserved when it could have collapsed under all that pressure. False defeat grows when a person counts absence more than endurance. But endurance is often one of the clearest proofs that I am still moving. Survival itself was proof of divine movement, even when you did not call it that. The fact that you are here now, listening, breathing, still able to hear my voice after everything that passed over you, already tells a deeper story than you have fully allowed yourself to believe. There were seasons where the weight should have taken more from you than it did. There were moments when sorrow should have hardened you more than it did. There were disappointments that could have turned your spirit cold, yet something inside you remained alive enough to continue. That was not accident. That was my hand moving quietly beneath your awareness. You may think survival sounds too small compared to the victories you hoped for, but survival under deep pressure is never small in heaven. When storms come repeatedly and yet something within you still rises one more morning, still reaches for one more prayer, still chooses not to disappear completely. Heaven recognizes strength even when earth only sees exhaustion. Many times my movement in your life looked like preservation before it looked like breakthrough. Before visible answers arrived, I first kept your mind from sinking where it could not return. I kept your spirit from fully surrendering to hopelessness. I kept certain wounds from reaching deeper than they intended. That too was divine movement, though you did not always recognize it because it did not appear dramatic enough for human eyes. There were days when you believed nothing was happening simply because no great answer arrived, but unseen movement was already keeping you from breaking in places that would have taken much longer to heal. You survived conversations that almost changed how you viewed yourself. You survived silent disappointments that no one else noticed because you chose not to explain them. You survived long periods where nothing around you gave proof that things would improve, yet still you continued. That continuing matters more than you know. You endured more resistance than visible people knew. This is something many around you could not fully understand because they only saw selected moments of your journey. They saw parts of your effort, parts of your waiting, parts of your smile, but they did not see how much invisible pressure stood behind ordinary moments. They did not know how many times your thoughts fought battles while your face remained calm. They did not know how often your heart became tired while you still answered others kindly. They did not know how many times one more disappointment arrived just when you had gathered strength to hope again. There were resistances around your life that did not announce themselves openly. Some came through repeated delay. Some came through doors that almost opened but changed suddenly. Some came through environments that demanded more from you than they demanded from others. Some came through being misunderstood while trying sincerely to do what was right. Some came through silent exclusions you could feel but could not explain clearly. Because much of that resistance was invisible, even you sometimes questioned whether you were imagining the weight. But I saw every hidden layer. I saw how certain paths became heavier the moment you approached them. I saw where extra effort was required simply to receive what others seemed to receive with less struggle. I saw how some answers stayed longer in silence around you than around others, and how that difference slowly touched your confidence. Yet the extra resistance was never proof that you were forgotten. It was proof that your journey carried pressures not everyone around you could measure correctly. And still, despite all that resistance, you remained. That matters deeply. Not because you never became tired, but because even tiredness did not erase you. Not because you never doubted, but because doubt did not own the final word. Not because you never cried, but because tears did not finish your story. What you thought was repeated failure was often repeated rising under pressure heavier than many people knew existed. So do not call yourself defeated because the road demanded more than expected. Do not define your story only by what took longer. Do not judge your worth by the number of times struggle returned. I was present in every hidden layer, counting strength where you counted loss, counting endurance where you counted delay, counting survival where you feared failure. And my child, if you are still here after all that pressed against you, then heaven already sees proof that failure never had the final right to name your story. My child, there are seasons of your life that felt heavier not because you lacked strength, not because you lacked wisdom, and not because you were somehow less worthy than those around you, but because some structures around you were already unfair before you ever arrived. I need you to hear this clearly, because too many times you blamed yourself for battles that began long before your first step entered the room. You looked at the resistance, the repeated slowing, the strange difficulty in places where you expected simple fairness, and because you did not always understand what stood beneath the surface, you quietly turned the blame inward. You wondered if perhaps you were doing something wrong, if perhaps your effort was never enough, if perhaps you had missed some key that others understood more easily. But there were systems around you that were already leaning in ways you could not immediately see. Certain doors were not standing neutral when you reached them. Certain spaces had already formed patterns that did not welcome what you carried. Certain people had already shaped opinions before they even heard your full voice. This is why some roads felt harder than they should have felt. When I say that some structures were unfair from the beginning, I do not say it to fill your heart with bitterness, but to free you from false guilt. There were moments when you entered situations sincerely, ready to do your part, ready to show honesty, patience, and effort, but you did not realize that the ground itself had hidden unevenness beneath it. Others around you may have seemed to move through those same spaces with less pressure, and that difference wounded your confidence, because you began comparing outcomes without knowing how much invisible resistance stood in your own path. Yet heaven saw the full picture. I saw what was already waiting before you arrived. I saw the patterns built into certain environments. I saw how some systems rewarded appearance more than truth, noise more than depth, and familiarity more than fairness. You were not imagining the weight. There were moments when the road truly was harder than it should have been. Some environments were already resistant before you entered them. Before you spoke, before you offered your work, before your heart even hoped that maybe this place would finally welcome you, resistance had already formed quietly in ways you could not detect. Sometimes resistance looked polite on the surface but remained firm underneath. Sometimes it wore a smile while withholding true openness. Sometimes it spoke kindly but carried hidden preference for what already looked familiar. This is why some places felt closed even when no one openly said no at first. You sensed tension but could not always explain it. You felt yourself giving effort into rooms that returned little warmth, little fairness, little honest space. That feeling did not come from weakness in you. It came because some spaces had already chosen what they trusted before you arrived, and what was unfamiliar to them faced a slower path. There were times when hidden bias stood quietly in front of you, and because it did not announce itself clearly, you were left wondering whether you were imagining the difference. Hidden bias rarely speaks loudly at first. It often appears through delayed answers, through being overlooked while others are noticed quickly, through subtle changes in tone, through doors that open halfway and then quietly stop. It appears when equal effort produces unequal response and no one explains why. It appears when sincerity is measured more harshly simply because it comes from the wrong place, the wrong face, the wrong history, or the wrong expectation in someone else's mind. I saw every one of those moments. I saw where your heart tried to remain respectful while inwardly asking why the same kindness did not return equally. Resistance also came through repeated rejection that did not always carry clear reasons. You remember times when you did your best and still received silence. Times when you waited for simple fairness and instead met uncertainty. Times when answers seemed near but shifted again. And because human hearts naturally search for explanation, you often turned inward and asked whether perhaps something about you deserved that distance. But some rejection came not because you lacked value, but because certain people were not prepared to receive what did not fit their comfort. Not every rejection is proof of your insufficiency. Sometimes rejection reveals limitation in the one deciding, not failure in the one being denied. Unfair treatment wounds deeply because it attacks both effort and confidence at the same time. You can work sincerely, stand honestly, wait patiently, and still feel unseen when fairness bends elsewhere. I know how that affected you. I know how exhausting it became when you kept hoping each next moment would finally feel balanced, only to discover that once again you had to explain more, prove more, wait longer, or carry more uncertainty than seemed necessary. The hardest part was not always the event itself, but the quiet loneliness that followed it, because unfair treatment often leaves a person wondering if anyone else even notices what is happening. Many around you saw only outcomes. They did not see how much extra pressure stood behind each result. Comment, "Thank you for never leaving me, Lord," if you felt His nearness when you were alone. You were fighting more than you understood. This is why your tiredness often felt deeper than the visible situation should have caused. You thought perhaps you were overreacting because outwardly some struggles looked small enough for others to dismiss. But inwardly, those small moments stacked upon each other until the weight became real. One delayed answer by itself may seem small. One unfair conversation by itself may seem manageable. One overlooked opportunity by itself may not look heavy to others. But when many such moments gather over time, they create pressure that touches the soul deeply. You were not only fighting the visible moment, you were fighting the accumulation of many unseen moments pressing together. There were battles happening in your spirit every time another unfair moment arrived. Each new resistance touched older disappointments. Each fresh delay awakened memories of earlier delays. Each closed response echoed other times you had tried and waited and wondered. This is why some moments hurt more than they appeared to outsiders. They were never only about one event. They touched layers beneath the surface that others did not know existed. Yet I knew. I counted not only what happened outwardly, but what each moment cost inside you. Even your silence during those seasons carried struggle that heaven recognized. Many times you chose not to explain because you were tired of sounding wounded. You stayed composed because you did not want every conversation to become about what felt unfair. You kept moving because life still required movement, even while inwardly your spirit asked why simple fairness remained difficult to find. That quiet endurance mattered. Heaven saw what others missed. I saw the discipline it took not to let bitterness take root where unfairness tried to grow. And my child, understand this carefully. I allowed you to see some of these uneven places not to make you hard, but to deepen your discernment. You are learning that not every closed answer defines your worth. Not every unfair structure has authority over your future. Not every resistant environment will decide where your story ends. Some systems were indeed uneven, but none of them set above my word over your life. Human structures may lean, but my hand still reaches beyond what humans arrange. What felt like being slowed unfairly was often also teaching you how not to build your identity inside systems that change with human preference. If every room had welcomed you easily, perhaps you would have trusted rooms too much. If every answer had come quickly, Perhaps you would have leaned too heavily on visible approval. But now you are learning that while systems may bend, my truth over you remains steady. You were fighting more than you understood, but you were also being held more than you understood. In places where fairness bent, I kept parts of you from breaking completely. In moments where rejection pressed harder than expected, I guarded your spirit from collapsing deeper than necessary. In environments already resistant, I preserved your future from being defined by their limits. So do not call yourself weak because certain roads exhausted you. Some roads truly carried extra resistance. Do not call yourself less because some systems did not respond fairly. Heaven knows where weight was uneven. Heaven knows where you stood inside structures already difficult before your arrival. And heaven also knows that despite all of it, you kept walking farther than many expected you could. My child, I saw every rigged door that closed in front of you, even the ones no one else knew you had hoped would open. I saw the quiet expectations you carried before you even spoke them aloud. I saw the moments when you prepared yourself inwardly, telling your heart not to expect too much because disappointment had already taught you caution, yet still a small part of you hoped that maybe this time would be different. I watched you gather courage before reaching again, before trying again, before trusting again, and I also saw what happened when that door did not move, when that answer did not come, when what looked possible suddenly became silent. Nothing about those moments escaped me. Not one opportunity that slipped away was hidden from my sight. Not one closed path happened where my eyes were absent. Even when others moved on quickly and forgot the moment, I remained there, seeing what that closed door meant inside you long after the outward event ended. There were opportunities you never fully told anyone about because you did not want to explain your hope before knowing the outcome. You carried them quietly, almost protecting them from being spoken too early because too many times before, words had returned empty. Yet I knew every hidden expectation. I knew which messages you waited for longer than you admitted. I knew which names you checked for, which answers you hoped would arrive, which small signs you searched for in silence. And when those opportunities closed, I saw the way your heart tried to remain calm while disappointment quietly entered again. Sometimes the pain did not show outwardly because you had learned how to hold yourself steady, but heaven still heard the silence afterward. The silence where your spirit asked why one more thing had become still again. Every delayed response was seen by me. Every hour you waited beyond what seemed reasonable. Every day that stretched longer than your patience expected. Every moment you wondered whether perhaps your words had been forgotten, whether perhaps your effort had reached a place where it no longer mattered. I saw how delay slowly changed the atmosphere inside you. At first, you waited with confidence. Then you waited with questions. Then you waited with guarded hope. And sometimes you reached the point where you stopped expecting entirely because protecting your heart felt easier than hoping again. Yet I was present through every stage of that waiting. I know how delay affects a person deeply because delay often speaks louder than words. Silence after effort can become heavy. Silence after prayer can become heavier still. Silence after you gave sincerity, honesty, time, and patience can make you wonder whether your voice mattered at all. But every delayed response carried more around it than what your eyes could read. Some delays existed because things behind the answer were not ready. Some delays existed because what looked simple from your side carried hidden movement beyond your sight. And some delays existed because not every answer delayed is truly denied. Yet while you lived inside that silence, I know it often felt personal. There were delayed responses that touched old wounds. One unanswered moment often awakened memories of many earlier unanswered moments. This is why some silence hurt more than others. It was never only one delayed answer. It carried the echo of every other time you had waited before. It touched places in you that had already known disappointment, already known hesitation, already known what it means to hope carefully because past silence had trained your heart to fear being let down again. Yet I counted all of that weight. I did not merely see the visible event. I saw what it awakened inside you. Every unfair rejection was witnessed by me fully. Every time sincerity met rejection that did not match your effort. Every time you stood ready, willing, honest, and still received less than fairness. Every time the answer given to you felt smaller than what you had poured into the moment. I saw the confusion in those seasons because unfair rejection always leaves questions behind. It is not only pain, it is confusion too. You ask why equal effort did not receive equal response. You ask why honesty did not produce openness. You ask why something that looked close enough to touch became distant without clear reason. There were rejections that came with words, and there were rejections that came without words at all. Some came through direct refusal. Some came through polite delay that slowly became distance. Some came through promises that faded without explanation. Some came through being overlooked while others were welcomed more easily. And because not every rejection explained itself clearly, you often filled silence with self-questioning. You asked whether perhaps something in you was missing. You examined yourself too harshly. You wondered whether your own worth had somehow become smaller in the eyes of others. But hear me now, not every rejection reflected truth about you. Sometimes rejection revealed limitation in the place rejecting, not lack in the one being refused. Right, you've always been faithful, Lord, if His hand has carried you through every season. And share this video.